Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to try painting lightning in watercolor. How do you do that? Well, if you're intimidated by this project, I wanted to let you know that it's easier than you might think. I'm going to show you two different ways that you can paint lightning in watercolor, one using liquid latex or masking fluid, and the other version using opaque white paint. So if you don't have one but have the other, just keep watching. I promise there will be a version that works for you. So let's get started. Now, if you want to get the same results as you're seeing in this video, you're going to want to use the best quality paper. The quality of the paints doesn't matter so much. I'm using just my favorite Daniel Smith and Holbein paints, but you can use any paints you have. Paper really matters. So today I'm using my favorite Fabriano Artistico 140-pound cold pressed paper, and this is on a block. That just means the sides are glued down except for this one little corner so that you can easily remove the strips of paper. I have actually taped down the sides. I'm using this 1/4-inch painter's tape, and that's just for pretty borders. That's just preference. You don't need to do this, but you will need some water jars, your paints, and if you're using masking fluid, you're going to need some masking fluid and a small brush for application. I recommend dipping your brush in water ahead of time, and if you want to preserve the bristles of your brush, you can actually swipe it on some soap too, and that actually helps preserve it a little bit better. Brushes you'll need for this project are a size 8 round brush for all the soft clouds and the basic washes, and then if you decide to include the city in the foreground, I recommend using an angular shader brush or a flat wash brush, something small that has a flat edge for all of those geometric shapes in the city. And then for your masking fluid or for your white paint, you're going to need a small liner brush to paint the lightning. All right, so as I said, in this first version, we're going to use masking fluid to protect the white of the paper for the effect of lightning. And that's going to be one of the first steps that we do. But actually, before we do that, I'm going to draw a little bit of a foreground. I want to make it really clear where the horizon line is and where the lightning will stop. So I'm just drawing kind of a bumpy line indicating maybe some city lights down here. And we'll go back in and paint that with some very abstract city colors. All right, for the masking fluid, I'm using my Daniel Smith masking fluid. Now, I actually have tried the applicator and I did not like it at all. So I'm just going to use a small brush to apply the masking fluid. To help preserve the bristles, because masking fluid can be very hard on brushes, I'm just using a cheap brush and I'm dipping it in the water first. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint on with the masking fluid all of the little strips of lightning that I want to include. Now, the nice thing about drawing on lightning is that they can be misshapen, they can be bumpy. You can make them any shape you want, and unless someone is comparing it to your reference photo, no one's going to know if it's not an exact copy of the reference photo. So there is an advantage to that for sure. The one striking here in the center is going to be the brightest. So I'm going to make that the thickest lightning strike right in the middle here. You do want to kind of work fast when you're using masking fluid because it will dry out and basically turn to latex or rubber. So work quickly. I do find I have to reapply pretty often just to get it to release on the paper for me. So I'm starting with the large center strip of lightning, making it bumpy, kind of jagged, and then I'm going to do little branch offs from it, arms splitting away from the center point. I'm not going to make it exactly like the reference photo. You can make your lightning whatever shapes you want. It's totally up to you as the artist. So this will take a little bit of time. Just be patient. Just keep loading up your brush with more masking fluid and work your way across until you're satisfied with the shape of your lightning strikes. Now, the masking fluid does not have to be painted on super thick in order for it to be effective. You can use a very, very thin layer for the finest little lines, and that will still remove and come off completely white at the end. So don't feel like you need to just glob it on the paper. A little bit goes a long way and does the job. But of course, where you want your lightning to be a little thicker, use more masking fluid, make them a little wider. I want to make sure I'm including all these wonderful little unique branches coming off and away from the main lightning bolts. Little teeny strands, almost like jellyfish arms. All right, so I think I'm pretty happy with that. Gonna rinse that out. Make sure you rinse and wash your brush right away to preserve the bristles, and it looks like that brush will live another day for me, so that's good. Now we need to let the lightning completely dry before we paint any of the sky around it. But in the meantime, we can actually go ahead and paint the foreground if you want. So I'm just grabbing my Silver Black Velvet size 8 round brush. Make sure you have some paper towel close by for blotting. But in the reference photo, it's this lit up city. It's kind of these hues of red and yellow and then the black shadows. So I'm going to wet my cadmium red and my yellow ochre and my indigo. So here's the cadmium red, yellow ochre, and indigo is this dark, dark blue down here. You can also use Payne's gray. I'm going to start with a 3/8 inch angular shader brush. The reason for this is that I want to get some interesting horizontal shapes in my city scene down below. So first we're going to do a little bit of base color with the round brush. I'm going to take the yellow ochre for that. This is just layering with a first layer so we get some color down. And here in the horizon line, there's a couple little city lights. I'm going to leave just a hint of white of the paper showing, and I will try to paint around that for the duration of the painting. Just leaving a few little lights. So important if you want to convey a city at night. The rest of that I'm just going to fill in with yellow ochre. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is just getting some color down. Okay, rinse that out, set aside your round brush. Now we're going to need to let that dry before we go in with dark shapes for the city. So let's let that sit for just a minute. All right, our city is just damp now. It's dried a little bit. It's at this point now where when you lay down brush strokes, they will mostly stay put, but still potentially soften a little, and that's a good thing. So now I'm taking my angular shader brush, and let's take some cadmium red, bold red color. Make sure there's not too much water, so blot on your paper towel so you're getting mostly pigment and not water, not any extra water. And we're going to paint this really bold red building right here in the middle. Couple little stripes using my angled shader brush. And then to balance out that color elsewhere, we'll just drop it in a couple other spots here and there. Let's put a couple horizontal lines representing rooftops or the sides of buildings over here. Rinse that out. And now let's actually grab brown. You can take whatever brown you have in your palette. I'm going to use my transparent brown oxide. That's this one right here. Or if you have burnt umber or some other brown, even burnt sienna will work just fine. And I'm going to paint some geometric shapes, suggesting some of the buildings just loosely based on what I'm seeing in the reference photo. Try not to be too perfect with this. Squint your eyes at the reference and just kind of paint loosely and freely. I'm going to grab some more rich yellow ochre and drop that in its darkest value. This does need to be dark. After all, we're looking at a city at night that's lit up by nighttime lightning. So don't go too bright. It does still need to look illuminated because, of course, a city at night, the lights are usually on. Going to actually mix a little of that yellow ochre with the cadmium red for more of an orangey tone. And just paint some taller shapes here. I'm just really blotting in shapes, nothing specific. Try not to see a building, an individual building. Look for interesting geometric shapes without being specific. All right, now I need to get some darker colors. So I'm grabbing indigo. And we're going to paint in the shadows in between our buildings. You do kind of want to do this while your paint is still damp or wet so that you end up with some natural softening. And in this far horizon, I want it to look like it's just kind of fading off into the distance. We don't want to be able to see specific detailed little buildings or even lights. We're just leaving hints and suggestions of that. So I'm just kind of filling in areas darker. Can paint little windows or doors here and there if you wish. I really don't have a lot of experience painting city scenes, but I have a feeling it would be a lot of angled or flat brushes like this because they work so well for those straight lines and straight edges. As you get towards the foreground, feel free to kind of darken it even more to create this vignette effect. where the city is just fading and disappearing away from the light. You can grab more red if you like, fill in these shapes darker, sort of mix it with the indigo that's on your brush for a darker reddish brown. I'm painting really intuitively right now. I'm not following my reference photo at all. Just creating interesting shapes. Let's take that full-on yellow ochre here for the front. And there we go. We have a very impressionistic city. By now our lightning has dried, and so we can paint the sky. I'm going to change my water really quick. Okay, so we're going to paint the sky in two sections. We're going to start with the strip of light surrounding our lightning, and then we're going to paint the dark clouds over the top. And this is all going to involve wet and wet. Now, if you're a little bit terrified of the wet and wet technique, don't be. It just takes practice, and it's one of the most useful and effective methods in watercolor for painting softness in a sky or anything really. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use our indigo color. That's this dark blue down here, as you'll recall. And if we want to make it look a little purple, we can mix in either quinacridone rose or alizarin crimson to kind of affect how warm or cool the color is. We are going to use wet and wet, so I'm dipping in the water first using my size 8 round brush. Now I'm going to wet the paper. Really, you can wet it as high up as you want. Everywhere up here is going to be darker anyway. So this area is going to be our lightest value in the sky. Paint delicately around your liquid latex. And if you see any pools or puddles forming, try to just push that around so that the water is dispersed evenly across the surface. Paint right up to your skyline, right up to your horizon. We're just painting with clean water, letting it soak into the paper, and that's pretty good. So you can see a glossy sheen. Let's grab our indigo. Swirling it around on the palette first. It's quite dark, and I'm going to start with that darkest tone on the outer edges of the lightning here, on either side. I want that color to just kind of crawl in towards the lightning without touching it yet. I'm going to rinse that a little bit. And then with less paint in my brush, now I'm swirling in the paint again. I have a lighter value on my brush. I'm going to paint in between those strips of lightning. Just the lower portion right here. Now we want that effect of a purple tone, so I'm dipping in my alizarin crimson. You can see that right here in my palette. I'm going to add a tiny bit of water, blot on the paper towel to remove any excess, and then take that purplish tone more towards the top. And you can see we're kind of getting this effect of a lit up sky already, just draping down. Dipping in the indigo again, I want to kind of soften this a little bit so it looks more like a natural transition from dark towards the light. While the paint is still wet, you can push and pull it a little bit, but as it begins to dry, you start to reach this danger zone where you want to leave it alone. Now here at the horizon line, I'm going to take some orange, or you can take your red. Don't have too much water in your brush, and just drop that in here at the horizon line. I want it to look like light exploding upward into the sky. Kind of the light pollution that you see at night. And then while you still have damp paint, take a damp brush. This is a damp, thirsty brush. I've rinsed it, I've dried it, and we're going to lift some of the paint from around the lightning striking. So I'm swiping along the edge of my liquid latex, lifting and removing that on the paper towel, then going back in and lifting a little bit more. I'm going to do that here at the top. Don't be too aggressive with this. You don't want to accidentally lift too much paint. But where the lightning is the brightest in your reference photo, you want it to look like it's just so bright surrounding your masking fluid. And our paper is really beginning to dry, so I think I need to be a little cautious here. We'll stop there. But you can see how it just looks like, with that lifting effect, how it looks like the lightning is illuminating the sky, and that's exactly what we want. Now let's work on the clouds at the top. We're going to re-wet the paper again, all the way to the top this time. And allow your water to come down and overlap into the lightning a little bit. Now we're trying to avoid hard edges with our clouds. So what that means is that when we apply paint into this dark cloud, we don't want to paint right up to where the wet edge is, otherwise that will form a hard edge. The paint stops wherever the water stops. So extend your water a little beyond where you plan on painting, gently feathering it into the lightning a little bit. And then working quickly, grab your indigo, swirl it around on your palette, and then blot it into the sky. We want it to be really dark at the top, almost pure black if you want. Just dabbing, allowing it to explode on the paper. Now I'm going to take that alizarin crimson and start to mix that in with the indigo for more purple clouds. And again, I'm just blotting that in. Now, as we approach the lightning, we want it to be slightly lighter. So I'm dipping in the water, removing some of that on the paper towel, and you can see I have a much lighter value now. I'm even going to leave little strips of the paper, just barely showing, to indicate some of the light behind the cloud. Just blotting and dabbing. Your paper should still be really wet if you want to get the same effect. So you have to work quickly so it doesn't dry out too soon. Now here on the edge of the cloud, you can manipulate and push the paint around a little more to form the shapes that you want for your clouds. So I'm just kind of pushing the paint with the tip of my brush, just trying to get the shapes that I want. If you want to go even darker, drop in some more indigo. Wet and wet at the top. Little strip of really dark clouds. Like I said, while your paper is still really wet, you can do all this wet and wet, drop more pigment in. Just don't introduce any extra water with your brush. Your brush is what controls the water on the paper too. And so any additional water that you might bring in on your brush is just going to push the paint aside and form cauliflowers and blooms. And we want to avoid that today. So that's why your paper towel is your best friend over here for controlling that. All right, I think I'm pretty happy with that. Goes quick, doesn't it? Wet and wet goes really fast if you do it this way. So just gently scrubbing out that edge a little bit. Softening here and there. If hard edges form, you can certainly kind of scrub along them with a damp brush to encourage them to soften out again. Now the next step is really just to let this dry, and then we'll remove our latex, we'll remove our masking fluid and see how we did. Before we do that, I'm going to take one layer of ultramarine and just kind of cover it across the top of my city. Just a tinted wash, kind of soften it all out and simultaneously darken it again. I feel like it is drawing too much attention to itself, and we definitely don't want it to compete with the lightning. So I think that helped soften and blur that out a bit. Really quick, I want to show you guys a version of the lightning striking. If you don't have masking fluid, this is what you can do. Use opaque white paint such as gouache, acrylic, or my favorite is this Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It works so well for the purest white over the top of watercolor. So you would do the painting the exact same way as the first one, except you'd skip the masking fluid step. So if you wanted to jump in with the sky, you would do it the same way, wet and wet. For the sake of time here, I'm going to leave out the city on this one. So you take your indigo and drop in your darker colors on the side. And get a little bit lighter as you're coming in towards the center, towards the lightning. Try not to have too much excess water, especially in your brush. That's what you have your paper towel here for. Control how much water is in your brush. And then introduce a little bit of pink in there if you want more of a purplish tone. Mix in some alizarin crimson or quinacridone rose. It's almost easier to get a flat, smooth wash when you're not worrying about covering up your masking fluid. Now towards the top here where the lightning is the thickest, lift out some of that paint, following the pathway of some of your lightning. While it's still damp, I'm removing the paint with a clean damp brush, removing the excess on my paper towel, and then lifting. This is just going to be in the areas where you want your lightning to be the brightest, to really have the most impact, to feel like it's just glowing in the sky. So follow those pathways with your brush, gently lifting out some of that paint. If it's a little too harsh, paint right back into it a little bit, but again, don't introduce any extra water in there. Right, and then so once you're happy with the streams of lightning, we're going to do the dark cloud over the top. Once again, wet and wet. Using your water, bringing it right down to where the lightning begins. Try not to let it pool or puddle, but make it wet enough so that you know that your paint is going to explode beautifully. So I'm removing that excess water, and then I'm grabbing my indigo, painting really dark at the top. Grabbing some alizarin crimson, that's this pinkish tone, blotting that in over the top of the indigo for a purple look. Grabbing some more indigo, I'm going to remove some of that, remove it on my paper towel so I have a lighter value as I approach the lightning. Just swirling and blotting with my brush. If you want to encourage the paint to spread out and drip down, you can tilt your board so the paint starts to drip down a little bit like that. And if you want to, you can add some overlapping clouds off to the side, maybe even coming in front of the lightning. So we're going to let that dry, and then we'll come back at it with our opaque white paint so you guys can see what the lightning looks like when we don't use masking fluid, but instead choose another approach for painting our white. So we'll set that aside and let that dry, and then we'll use the opaque white paint, and I'll show you guys what it looks like when you're using an alternative to the masking fluid. I think this painting is dry enough that we can remove the masking fluid. Using a clean finger or an eraser or a paper towel, gently remove your liquid latex. And I like to use a clean, soft brush, dry brush, of course, to remove that. And so you can see the shape of the lightning has just been perfectly preserved. Now, one little spot I'm not really happy with is this area of lightning up in the clouds. I want to cover that up so that it looks like it's behind the clouds. To do that, you can reactivate your paint by wetting the area again. And I suggest doing this a little bit beyond even where you're working so that you don't have any weird hard edges. And then go ahead and cover that up with color. Wet and wet again. And if you want to remove any hard edges that are forming, swipe a clean brush along those edges to encourage softening. Yeah, I think that turned out pretty cool. So there's our finished lightning strike painting. We'll let that dry all the way before we remove the tape. All right, we're coming back to our lightning striking using white opaque paint. So we're going to take the Dr. P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White, and you're going to need a really small brush for this. I'm going to use this Arteza liner brush. Wet it first so that your paint will flow for you. And now you get to go in and paint your specific lightning. All right, I'm going to start with the strongest one. It originates right about here and just kind of snakes down. Gets a little bit wider, so I'm smashing the brush down a little bit more for a wider lightning strike. Feel free to zigzag it, guys. Lightning does crazy things, doesn't it? So this is a great thing to paint if you don't have a steady hand, but you still want to paint. Just paint lightning and clouds. There are so many things to paint if you're not confident about details, but still want to paint something that looks detailed. Make sure you include all those little spin-offs, those little branches cutting away from the center strikes. This one has one little one that's coming out like this. And then it splits at the bottom. And make those two connect at the top. And then we have some more intricate and complex strikes over here. Really, it's totally up to you to include as much or as little of this as you want. But if you did lift the paint out to highlight certain areas in the sky, let your lightning follow those paths so that it looks like it makes sense. This version of watercolor lightning definitely saves you a step and is a lot easier, I would say, than using masking fluid, but it does look different. We'll compare the two side by side so you can see the difference. And the opaque paint, of course, it's leaving a sheen on the surface. It has a little bit of texture versus the white of the paper showing through. It's just a lot more transparent and more of a pure way to paint with watercolor. But there certainly is no right or wrong way to approach this. I wanted to show you guys two different options in case you have one and not the other. So there's the finished painting using opaque white paint. I think it looks awesome. And then we're going to show you these two side by side. Remove the tape on this one so you can see our beautiful clean borders. They look very different, and you can see that the lightning on the one that we painted on directly is a little bit cleaner looking. And I think that's just because the nature of being able to control those little strands of lightning a little bit better. So using an opaque white paint works so well. If you're kind of a control freak, you want to make sure you get all those exact little strips of lightning just perfect. The wonderful thing about using masking fluid is that you are painting most purely. You're preserving the white of the paper. You're not introducing any opaque paint to your composition. I also obviously spent a little more time on the clouds on this one and the city, so it's a little bit more complex. But there we have it. There's our two different versions of lightning striking over a city at night. I had so much fun painting these. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. And if you decide to try either one of the versions of this painting, please tag me on Instagram at @eolsonart. I'd love to see your work, and I love to reshare it in my stories for everyone to see. So this one was using the opaque white paint, and this one is using liquid latex or masking fluid. I think both turned out pretty cool.